So wait, Michael, my question is, have you gone to bed or are you still awake?
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yes, indeed.
The sleep madness is not here yet, so.
Oh, that's always good. Good morning, and I'm glad to see an actual crowd. So, if you're here, you've hopefully seen what my talk is. It's what Dungeons & Dragons taught me about InfoSec. So before I start jumping in, how many people in here have actually played Dungeons & Dragons before? Awesome, that means there's far less explanation to do. The first time I gave a version of this talk, I learned that the overlap of people who play Dungeons & Dragons and con attendees isn't quite as big as I originally thought. Yes. So just a little bit about me. My name is Joey Maresca, l0stkn0wledge. For those who don't know, I'm a dork. I love Star Trek, I love Star Wars, I love Legos. I love Star Wars Legos. I love Lord of the Rings. I like good cigars and I like good bourbon. So if any of you came out to DerbyCon on Friday night, you are well aware of my love of bourbon, and I got to share a little with you. A little bit more about me. If you're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, you need to cover your archetype, and we'll get into this more if you don't understand the alignment system, but I tend to say I lean more towards chaotic neutral. So we'll get into what that means, but here's my mandatory disclaimer. All views and opinions contained within this presentation are my own. They do not reflect the beliefs of my employer or any other affiliated organizations. I kind of sort of got in trouble about that once. So what is Dungeons & Dragons? So if anyone's never played before, it is a tabletop role-playing game. You have many books with the rules of the game, lay out all the details. It's largely based on chance because everything's based around dice rolls, and it's nerds sitting around a table. I mean, what it is. What is Dungeons & Dragons? This is one of my favorite slides when I was searching the internet. I think it details it pretty well. What everybody actually thinks that you're doing when you're playing Dungeons & Dragons. So, yes. So the first lesson I got from Dungeons & Dragons when it comes to InfoSec is that it takes a team. And so this looks a lot at the characters that you have when you do in Dungeons & Dragons. So all the characters have different races. All your standard fantasy races: elves, orcs, humans, halflings, and you have classes. So they all have different abilities, from different fighter classes through to magic users and sorcerers and paladins, and so you get this mix that covers bboth standard fighting classes and everything else. And you see a lot of this even in InfoSec. You have people with different skill sets that bring different things to a team, and so in many ways they're like the different classes. While I was searching the internet, I did find somebody who tried to explain classes through the use of superheroes. I kind of liked that, so I took a similar image and made it a little more readable for a presentation. So, explaining the classes through superheroes, I think works really well. The one thing I didn't label on here is they tried to identify Nick Fury as the dungeon master of the group. So I think that kind of works. But like as I said, in InfoSec you have a lot of classes. So you have coders. You have the hackers. You have the people who are your Metasploit masters. You have the networking geniuses who know Nmap and Wireshark inside and out. And you have hardware guys. You have mobile and OS guys. And so you have all these different skill sets that different people have to bring together. For one person to have all of these skills isn't going to happen. There's not one person who's going to be a master at all of them. So something else that happens in Dungeons & Dragons is multi-classing. And so, I'm not trying to say that you need one person to specialize in each thing. You will have certain people who will have different skills across multiple areas. You're going to have people who are both really good with networking and probably really good with, dealing with certain operating systems, but they're not necessarily going to have, strong abilities in coding or as strong of ability when it comes to doing like hardware and hardware hacking. So now we get into the alignments. So I originally loved the Muppets idea, and then I also realized that apparently, sadly, there are many people in the con community who don't know who the Muppets are. Yes, I blame this fully on me getting old, and not enough young people actually caring anymore. So I'll kind of try to go through. I have some, actually, when I first gave this talk, this was a big point that a lot of people didn't quite grasp. So I have added a lot of slides trying to explain alignment. Well, I thought I did. Oh, great. They're all missing. Yay. Wrong version of the slide deck. So I will do my best to explain. So I think the biggest problem everyone has when you go and look at alignment is trying to explain the difference between lawful versus chaotic and how lawful is different from good. The part that people who've never played Dungeons & Dragons, it seems to be the hardest is how do you have somebody who's both lawful and evil? That seems counterintuitive in an individual mind. So the thing to understand is that lawful versus chaotic is more about having a set of rules or set of laws versus and having a structured code versus kind of doing things a little more wild and loose. With the chaotic side, you don't necessarily have that end. To the lawful evil side, you might have the Darth Vader or somebody like that who's they want order. They're generally viewed as the evil character. If anybody here actually thinks that they're the good character in Star Wars, we can talk later. But they still have this structure. They want to bring order to the galaxy, but it's not necessarily in a good way. Whereas with chaotic evil, you get the far more wild and loose. It's like the Joker, from The Dark Knight. Just evil for evil's sake. There's no necessarily rhyme or reason for it, and that's that's where the chaotic evil comes in. And then chaotic good. So this is one that's always argued on the internet. It's kind of fun trying to find explanations for these because nobody agrees on what other characters should fall into. I tend to agree that with the crowd that believes that Batman falls into chaotic good. You think about it. See, now I'm getting sighs from the front row. But come on, let's think about it. By nature, he's a vigilante. He follows his own moral opinion, so he's going to do what is best in his view and against his code. Yes, he has a code which could make him more towards lawful, but at the same time, it's a long debate that I won't get into. Yes, and that's just it, and that's so. But what they try to do for lawful versus neutral and chaotic is, you try to look at it from, there's a quote from Star Trek, and I'm not gonna get it right, but it's something along the lines of, laws change based on who's in charge and what people are in power, but justice is always the same. And I think that kind of gets to the heart of the good versus evil versus lawful versus chaotic. So it's kind of that structure. So I tried to make alignments for InfoSec, at least as I see them and as best I could. So the lawful good, I've kind of said, are the cert teams. As much as some of us despise cert and certifications, the reality is that, they have a set of codes and rules that they're supposed to follow, and they're going to go follow and mark those check boxes. And so their intentions are good, even if it doesn't necessarily help us with security. Neutral good I kind of have as the blue teams of the world. They're the ones trying to make sure defensively we're good. They don't care so much about the rules so much as the security. And the chaotic good is the red teams. The reality is when you're on a red team, when you have a red team, you're not going to necessarily follow follow the rule of the law, because in the end your goal is to replicate those different types of attackers and those different people who might be the ones who are wanting to gain access to your data. So those are the people. Since you're replicating those people, your behaviors aren't following those people. But in the end, you're still good because your intentions are to find these problems and help the companies fix them. The lawful neutral. I put Lego bricks for developers. I couldn't find another good representative picture of developers that would show up in that nice small window. Yes, I thought about that as well. The true neutral I put as the help desk. I mean, come on, let's think about it. The help desk, in the end, they just want to get people off the phone and get tickets closed as quick as possible. The chaotic neutral, the white hats. In the end, a lot of times it's kind of in between. Sometimes you get the ones who it's a little bit about glory and a little bit about, hey, look what I did and look what I found. Others actually do want to make things a little better and might lean more towards chaotic good. It's hard to put an entire group into a single category, but for the purposes of a talk, I did it. Lawful evil are all the lawyers we have to deal with. I mean, again, they want to follow the law and they mean good, but in the end, they make our lives miserable. Or actually, no, those were the execs. Sorry, the lawyers are neutral evil. And chaotic evil are the black hats. The ones who are trying to get into your network for whatever nefarious purpose, whether it's just for the lulz, or if it's actually to get your data and make it available to everybody. So lesson 2, the dungeon master. You need a director. So as much as some of us probably hate the concept of some of our management teams, in reality they are necessary. So here's the dungeon master behind his mysterious screen, and his job is, to direct the order of the story. You can see, behind the screen they've got, all the, laid out all the plans. They've got all, their own set of dice. The one thing you never want to hear when you're playing D&D is the dice rolling while you're just, you're like, I wasn't doing anything. Yes, I know. It's a lot like herding cats. It's leading the way, both with Dungeons and Dragons and in InfoSec. I know sometimes leading a team into one direction can be like herding cats. So I've been management now a few times, and it's definitely trying to get people moving in a common direction can be a task at times, but it's why we have the dungeon masters of the world. It's why we have management. We do have many dungeon masters, whether it's our customers who are directing, what your mission is, whether that's internal customers, if you're an IT help desk, those are the people who are, sitting at the workstations and that you're trying to help out. Whether, if you're doing contract work and that's the companies you contract to, internal teams, everything else. You have your team leads, you have your supervisors, and even the upper management. We have all these people that direct our day-to-day task, and in the end we may not always agree with them, but they're still the ones that we ultimately report to. So lesson 3, dungeons. Every network is a dungeon. When I was working on this, I think one of the things I found most interesting had to do with how similar some of the network diagrams I looked to maps of dungeons that people had made online. Here is a prime example of that. It's very interesting to me. You look at it and you see very common themes. You see little node points where there are different branching out areas. And so you see all these different places where the mapping is very similar. And so in this sense, you have navigating a dungeon. So, you come in, you walk around, you may wind up in a dead end and have to find another path. But, maybe you find a room that has something interesting in it. It's the same thing with networks. You come in from, outside, go through the routers, you get into a DMZ, you find some back door into an internal system that, you wanted to work, that you actually are the target you're trying to get to. So, in Dungeons and Dragons, we have obstacles. You run into doors, and traps and things like that are getting in your way. We run into things like firewalls, right? If you're doing, if you're doing a penetration test on a system, you're going to run into these sorts of things. You're going to find obstacles that are going to be the bane of your existence. So what do you do when you find an obstacle? You find ways around it. In Dungeons and Dragons, you pick the lock on the door. You try to get trying to get in where you want to go, and and in our world, you have to use pivoting to go from one network to another to try to find a way to get from one place that may be considered low priority to the place of high priority that you're actually wanting to go. You run into traps, whether it's the giant Indiana Jones style ball chasing you down, or thank goodness we don't have that in InfoSec. I'm not very athletic. In the networks, you have things like honeypots, and you have different things where they're trying to intentionally catch you, and you're intentionally trying to catch even the bad guys. So if you're in these examples, some of these things, in many cases, you may even be the dungeon master who's created these networks and created these traps, and so the people who are trying to get in, you're the one trying to catch them with these. So, it's very, I enjoy the similarities. Then you have creatures. No dungeon is complete without creatures. Everything from kobolds to skeletons to dragons. From InfoSec, I see that a lot as the different tools and different resources that we use. Whether that's using your SEAMs, your IDSs, your AVs, all these tools that we have, for defensive purposes. That if you're the one building the dungeon, these are the things that you're putting in the way to keep people from getting to the treasures that are maintained in the dungeon, or in this case, in our networks. And really, that's just what the next thing is, the treasure. Ultimately, every time in Dungeons and Dragons you go into a dungeon, you're trying to kill the dragon, get the treasure. What's the point of going in if there's nothing in there for you? And if you're a penetration tester, that's getting all the goodies from the inside. So whether you're the one trying to do the penetration test, and you're the one who's actually trying to get the treasure, or you're the one trying to defend it, ultimately, that's the ultimate reason that we have InfoSec, right? We're trying to protect secrets, and it's no different than protecting the treasure in the dungeon. So, and I'm speeding through this once again. I hate when I do this. So, playing the game, using your imagination. So again, I have this image of the dungeon again. When you're playing, all you have is the map in front of you. You have your dice. So if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you kind of have to use your imagination to take, map into, I am wearing the armor and I'm going to slay the dragon and all of that. And so, as much as I hate one of these pictures, the reality of computers is they're not, and networks is, we have all this abstract view of the world. We have the interfaces we deal with, but in the end it's all just binary ones and zeros. And how they behave on the wire and everything else may not always meet up, because depending on where you stand in the process will depend on what level of abstraction you actually have into the system. For most people, it's going to be a black box. Most of the time, all you're going to have is, yes, this is the interface I have. What it's doing on the backside, you're not going to know. And so you have to, this is why you have to do, this is why we have to do testing on systems. This is why, and so this is why it requires a little imagination to think, well, if I was going to make this system, how would I do it? If I was going to, if I'm looking at a piece of code, well, if I was going to implement this functionality, how would I implement it, and what methods might that leave open for potential avenues of attack, and where should I look to defend information? And so that's the, for the defenders, it's good to look at that information and try to think what the attackers are going to be looking for. And from the attacker's perspective, it's good to look at the development side, to look and say, what would the people who built this network, who built this software, what would they have done? Because in the end, you usually don't know. there are going to be times where you have open source things that people have put out there where you're going to have a little more insight, but it's that level of abstraction and getting to know that requires us to use our imagination and to envision these things. There's problem solving. Again, wonderful pictures I found. Oh, you have you? Yes. Yes. The 6 adapters to use the micro SD card, going into the mini SD card, going into the SD card, going into the flash, going into the PCMCIA. God, are those even still around? The BIOS that comes up and says keyboard not found, press F1 to or zoom. Thanks, I think. So, and we run into this, you're building a system and you put everything together and you're sitting there staring at it like, why doesn't this work? You build a network and you're like, okay, everything's great. This is fully secured and you should be able to talk and everything. And you plug in the computers and somebody tries to go do something and you're like, where's all my traffic going? Where's Google? Where's Google? We have to solve problems, and that's across the board. When you're building systems, you have to solve the problems. When you're trying to break the systems, you have to solve the problems. So much of our life revolves around solving problems, and usually they're other people's problems. So the 5th lesson, the elements of chance. Nothing ever goes the way you expect it to. This is kind of like the problems problem. Yes. So in Dungeons & Dragons, it's always a roll of the dice. So everything we do is all about a dice roll, and everything we do it's very much the same way in InfoSec. It goes back to the problem. You set everything up and for some reason something's not working, or you get the network set up and then you spend 3 hours debugging it and realize that, oh, when I spliced this Cat5 cable, my connections just really sucked. Damn. So it doesn't matter. I love the natural one image. There's always some chance. You could have the biggest, baddest, character, but if you roll a natural one, you're just going to stick the axe in your face. And the same thing happens in InfoSec. Devices are going to break, code that doesn't compile, and you're sitting there staring at it and find out later it's some obscure bug that makes you want to drink for the rest of the night. Exploits that just won't run. I've seen all of these, and it's very frustrating. You take a piece of equipment out of one network, it was working perfectly, move it to the other one, and all of a sudden it doesn't want to work anymore. And you're just like, really? Moving it's all I had to do to break it? I also love the epic fail picture for, the blue screen of death throwing an error. It's kind of priceless. We have a name for this. It's called Murphy's Law. We all know it. Anything that can possibly go wrong will. It's so bad, of course, I found about 20 or 30 different variations of the Murphy's Law of computing. People have written up lists of every possible thing that ever went wrong for them. And then I found somebody who did a nice little Murphy's Law of combat as it relates to role-playing games. And it's very true. When I was doing this slide, it also reminded me of a list that I saw. Oh god, this would have been like 15, 20 years ago. It was like quotes you never want to hear when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, like, oh, don't worry, it's just a couple of kobolds. It's one of those things where, ultimately something is going to go wrong. It always happens. And I did run through this again. Oh god, I hate when I do this. Do I even want to know how much time I have left? Oh, I only have 2 minutes? Oh, sweet. I thought I ran through this. The first time I did this talk, I think I got through it in 15 minutes. And I was like, oh, shit. So again, the 5 lessons, it takes a team. Like I said, no one person's going to be enough. And this is one of the things, when I was sitting there during Ed Scudis's keynote on on Thursday, and he was talking about, the collaboration and everything else. It drives me nuts to think of times where you have these teams who are doing penetration tests, or people who are building networks, or you can extrapolate that to anything where it's not a team anymore. You've got one person doing it, and that's just never going to be enough. Even if the person's an expert about everything they're trying to look at, you always need more than one set of eyes. The other one that always drives me nuts is places where they let the person both implement and then test the system, because there's no conflict of interest there at all. You need a director. You need somebody to lead the way. You need somebody to keep everyone on task. It happens to me. You're working on a project. You're doing something. You find one thing that you think's going to be the best path to your end goal, and so you start down a rabbit hole. And the next thing you know, you're 5 days into that rabbit hole, or 10 days into that rabbit hole, and you're like, all of a sudden, you're like, where the hell am I? You pop out of the ground in Antarctica and say, shit, maybe I should have made that left turn at Albuquerque. Thank you for that comment the other day, by the way. Every network is a dungeon. Again, the way we build things, I just thought that one, I thought it was very interesting to see. Use your imagination. Trying to solve problems is a big part of what we do. So, and it requires our brain power. If we're going to call ourselves hackers, then we need to be able to think outside the box. And nothing ever goes the way you expect, including these talks, apparently, when I give them. Any questions? Anything? Good. I didn't put you all to sleep. I know that was probably a problem. I saw you nodding off a few times. Thanks. All right. Thank you.